All right, hello, this is Ron with Mobile Fix Automotive again. This time we're going to be doing the actual replacement video on the alternator on a 5.4 Triton motor. This is a 2002 F150. It's the same vehicle we did the diagnostic on the battery light for, and I'm going to show you how to knock one of these alternators out pretty quick. The first thing that you need to do, which I've already done, is to take, if you have the plastic shield on top of the engine, go ahead and remove it. This one had a single bolt here that was 10 millimeter and two 8 millimeter bolts that were in through the side. Pull these plastic, I should say, breather tubes off. Loosen this nut here for your hose clamp on your throttle body, and loosen this nut here, which is your hose clamp for your air filter assembly. Squeeze your electrical connector for your air temperature, and then just pull this nice little thing off and set it aside. Okay, so what we're going to be dealing with right now is we've got 3 electrical connectors that have to come off. The very first thing I'm going to do is have him back out just a little bit and look at the battery, because we're going to take a wrench and we are going to disconnect the negative post on this battery, so that regardless of whether or not I make a mistake, we're not going to short anything out on the alternator.
Isn't that positive post?
What? Okay, so I disconnected the negative battery terminal. The downside to this is more likely than not, all your radio stations are going to go kaput. If it's disconnected long enough, usually more than 10 minutes on an OBD2 system, it's going to erase any of your codes in your system if you have any codes, stuff like that, but that's nothing to worry about. So once that's done, we are going to climb up in here and start getting busy. And the first thing I'm going to do is start getting tools ready. And I'm going to disconnect the 3-wire connector, which is pretty easy on this one to pull out. The single wire connector, which when you pull on the wire, if it's really stiff, the next thing you're going to do is get yourself a little pocket screwdriver or a little pick. And there is a little clip on the back side. See that right there? Just slide that in there, give it a little press, and it'll pull right out. And then take this wiring harness and just put it someplace that it won't get back in your way for a few minutes. Move the boot out of the way for your main charge cable. This one's got a 10 millimeter nut. So we're going to take the 10 millimeter nut off, put it in our magnet tray so we won't lose it. We're going to remove this wire. We're going to pull it out of the way. Now, at this point, if the battery was still connected and this piece right here was to touch anything metal, you're going to let the smoke out, as we like to call it. There'll be a dead short, so you don't want that. That's why we disconnected the battery. So as of right now, the electrical on the alternator is completely disassembled. The next step is to remove the alternator belt. And this is a 1/2-inch square drive. So what I'm going to do, I don't know if my assistant's going to be able to get a nice look at this down here or not. Once I get this put on, there's a little square hole. I'm going to put some light down here. Can you see anything down there, Justin?
Not really.
On your tensioner for your drive belt, there's a square hole on the end of it. Okay, you can put a ratchet in there, or you can get the cool little tool, which I own, but actually I like doing a ratchet on this better. And you're going to pry towards the driver's side of the vehicle, and then just pick the alternator belt up and just let it sit right on top of the water pump. Slowly release the tension off of the ratchet or the pry bar, whatever you're using to do this, and just leave it there. There's no need to move that. You're not going to be starting the engine just yet. Okay, so we're going to move that out of the way. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the bolt on the back of this alternator. There's 3 bolts because there's a bracket that stabilizes the alternator onto the front of the intake manifold. So I'm going to pull that bolt out, and then I'm just going to loosen the other 2. I'm going to have to switch over to a wobbly socket. This one makes it a little easy for me to get in here. Okay. So now that bracket assembly, now you can take this bracket off if you don't want to fight it. At this point, I'm going to try to do it with the bracket on. It just saves me having to start the threads on 2 more bolts. And then at the base of this alternator are 2 10mm head bolts. And for some reason, my air ratchet flipped itself back to the on position. So we're going to take these 2 bolts out. And at this point, the alternator can fall down or fall forward. So be careful with it. Okay, I'll put my other bolt right there. Sometimes you can get lucky and this alternator will actually be slotted and all you have to do is loosen the 2 bolts. But this is an aftermarket alternator and it did not come with the slots. Did you see how I pulled that out? Sometimes it's actually cut right here and you can leave the bolts in and it'll drop right down in and balance itself. So go ahead and pause for a second. Okay, so now that we have our defective alternator with the bad regulator assembly or diode in it sitting on the bench, we have our remanufactured quality Ford Motorcraft alternator, and I'm not going to give you the part number on this, and the reason for it is that these things come in different amperages, there's different housing sizes and all this other stuff, so look up the alternator for your vehicle, make sure it fits. And part of that is I ordered the part that I want. Now I've got to make sure it's going to fit the vehicle. So I'm going to take it out of its packaging. I'm going to save the box because the core has to go back. And I'm going to set this down. Now you're going to notice on the Ford remanufactured, and this is really normal, the pulley is on the old one, but it's not on the new one. One of the things I'm not going to be able to show you on this video is if you get a reman or a brand new alternator and it already has a pulley on it, take that pulley and take the old alternator and put them face to face and make sure that the diameter on the pulleys are the same size and outer diameter and that they have the same amount of ribs as far as, if you look at this one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is a 5 rib. So there's actually 5 of these little lines that the grooves that the belt ride on. Okay, Ford allows you to just basically switch it over. That way you get the same speed on the alternator that you're changing out. If you change this, it will either make your belt tighter or looser, and it can also change the speed of the alternator and change your output current. So what I'm going to do right now is check, make sure everything else is right. Okay, so we have a bolt here, so that's right. We have a post here and a post here, so that's right. We have a single pole here, 3 prongs there, 3 prongs here. Okay, so this alternator is exactly the right alternator. There is sometimes when you get these from some of the lower, let's just say basic parts houses, it may not come with this red extension right here. And if that's the case, pop the little cap off, loosen the 10mm nut, swap this over to your new alternator. That's no big deal. That happens once in a while on the cheaper alternators. They're less expensive, however you want to put it. Okay, so at this point, what I need to do is I need to make, this is not a real spacer. This is just put there so the nut doesn't go into oblivion. I'm going to take a 15/16 socket on the end of a 1/2-inch impact wrench. And I'm going to zip that off. Pull this off. Now, this one has the spacer built into the pulley, which is really good. If it doesn't and the spacer's on there, you will pull that spacer off and put it on the new alternator. Now if you look at this one, you'll notice that the front housings are a little different. Okay, this one actually has a protrusion on it where this one doesn't. Okay, this is a motorcraft housing. This is not a motorcraft housing, more than likely. So what I'm going to do to make sure that this is okay is I'm going to put this on, make sure it's not grinding on the housing, and take the new nut. We're going to tighten this thing down. And I'm going to make sure this alternator spins freely. No grinding, no noises. Okay? One of the things you want when you spin this is you want to see this pulley drag to a stop. We'll do that one more time for you. See how it's spinning and then it comes to a quick stop? That means the brushes have a nice bite on the armature on the inside, on the slip rings. If you spin that and it just keeps going, your brushes are weak. So at this point, just go ahead and follow me over. There's no need to pause it because I can walk here in the amount of time it'll take to do that. So now I'm going to take this alternator. I'm going to move this radiator hose out of the way. I'm going to roll it down in here. And I'm going to take one of the bolts for the bottom of the alternator. I'm going to get this thing lined up here. See if I can get one bolt started. Okay. Let's see. Where's that bolt hole at? There it is. Okay. So I'm going to get that bolt started. Just a couple of threads, just enough so I know it's not going to cross thread on me, which is when the bolt goes in crooked. And then I'm going to get the second one started. Go in 2 or 3 threads, so I know it's not going to cross thread. And then I'm going to grab the bolt that came out of that bracket assembly. And I'm going to get it started on the back of the alternator here. Okay, so this one wants to be a little difficult, so what we're going to do is slide the alternator back, and now it'll line up easier. And before I tighten up these 3 bolts on the back, I want to tighten up the bolts. Let me grab my air hose real fast. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go back down in here and I'm going to tighten these bolts back up. Right before they get tight, I'm going to make sure this alternator is seated properly, that it's not binding. Because if it's crooked, you can crack the case on it, but I haven't seen that very often, but I have seen it. Once that's tight, we're going to go back down in here and tighten up the back bolts. Cinch them down real good. Now remember, when you're tightening these down, these are not engine mount bolts. They're not supporting the weight of a 1,000-pound engine. They're supporting the weight of an alternator. So if you want to do by torque specifications, you can. These are roughly about 25 foot-pounds, 25 to 30 foot-pounds. You don't want to go too tight. Remember, this is bolted to a plastic intake manifold, so the last thing you want to do is make more work for yourself. So I am going to now put the positive back on the battery. But the one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to tighten that one down with an impact wrench, because I do not want to break the inside of that alternator. So I'm going to take a 10 millimeter on a 1/4 inch drive, and I'm just going to give it a nice firm snug without hurting it. And I'm going to bring my protective boot back down. I'm going to plug in my 3-wire connector. Nice little click on there. And then I'm going to push in my single wire connector, and nice little click on that one. Okay. Now the one thing that I already noticed happened that makes life fun sometimes is that
drive belt slipped off the water pump and the power steering pulley. So make sure that all your pulleys, your belt's on all your pulleys before this step. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my extension and I'm going to pull it towards me until I can safely and easily get this belt back on. I'm going to pull my extension back out, my ratchet, and I'm going to take my flashlight and make sure that the belt is on all the pulleys. What I'm looking for right now is to make sure that the belt is centered around the power steering, the air conditioning, the tensioner, the crankshaft, the alternator, and the idler. Everything looks good. And so at this point right now, the alternator is considered replaced. We just have to put our air assembly back together, which, you know, I have faith in you guys being able to do. Put the cover back on it, reattach your negative battery cable, and then run a test on the charging system, verify that your light's out on your dashboard for your battery, and verify that you're charging a minimum of 13.2 to 13.5 is what I like to see on a good alternator. And at that point, this is a fairly simple video, but for people that need help with the do-it-yourself on something as simple as an alternator, that's how I do it. Feel free to watch it over and over again, make sure you get it right. Happy to help. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. I do the best to return them. Once again, I'm Ron. My helper assistant Justin is shooting the video, and he just smiled back. And we'll see you on the next video, and there's more to come. Thanks a lot.